My unfaithful wife was cheating with another man for several weeks without my knowledge. But when I discovered the truth, I said nothing and simply left her while blocking all assets. Hey everyone, my name is Dylan, and I'm 29 years old. I had been with Victoria for 4 years, and we'd been engaged for 8 months at the time this all happened. We hadn't set a wedding date yet, but there was nothing wrong with our relationship. We just weren't rushing into anything major. We were still saving money and trying to figure out exactly what kind of wedding we wanted. Victoria would change her mind every other week about the details. One day she'd want a big celebration with all our friends and family. The next week she'd prefer something small and intimate. Sometimes she'd talk about finding a local venue. Other times she'd get excited about the idea of a destination wedding. Honestly, it didn't matter to me as long as she was there with me at the altar. We'd have these conversations sometimes, but not in some serious spreadsheet planning kind of way. They were more like casual, playful discussions that would spiral into ridiculous debates. She'd ask if we should get married on a beach somewhere, and within 10 minutes we'd be arguing about sand getting in our shoes and whether the ocean breeze would ruin her hair. That was just us. We had this chill, playful dynamic that made even the mundane stuff entertaining. I thought we had a stable relationship. I worked as a network security specialist, which provided good money without any workplace drama. Victoria did freelance graphic design work, which was a bit unpredictable income-wise, but she always made it work somehow. I naturally ended up covering more of our shared expenses, but she never made a big deal about it, and neither did I. We weren't the type of couple who split bills with calculators or kept score of every dollar spent. We operated as a team, or at least that's what I believed back then. Our life together felt normal in the best possible way. Saturday mornings meant coffee runs to that little place downtown where the barista knew our regular orders. We do grocery shopping together like some couple twice our age, debating whether we really needed the expensive olive oil or if the store brand would work just fine. Sunday nights were reserved for takeout from whatever restaurant we were craving, followed by some random documentary that Victoria would start watching but never actually finish. We weren't the party type, and we didn't feel the need to post everything on social media or prove anything to anyone. It was just easy being with her, and I loved that simplicity. Victoria was naturally affectionate and energetic, always having a dozen different things to talk about at any given moment. I was more on the quiet side, preferring to observe and listen rather than fill every silence with conversation. She'd fill up all the space in our talks with her enthusiasm and ideas, while I'd anchor everything down and keep things grounded. Somehow that dynamic just worked perfectly for us. Then one Tuesday evening, everything changed completely. Victoria told me that her aunt was seriously sick, not just regular cold and flu sick, but life-threatening, in the hospital kind of sick. I remember she sat down right next to me on our couch, still holding her phone in her hand and looking completely shaken up about the news. She said her mom had just called with the update, and things weren't looking good at all. According to Victoria, this aunt was like a second mother to her. She had helped raise Victoria part-time during her childhood and looked after her when her parents went through their messy divorce. Victoria had mentioned this aunt before in passing conversations, but I'd never actually met her in person or heard too many details about their relationship. Victoria explained that she needed to go back home immediately to be there with the rest of her family during this crisis. She wasn't sure about the timeline. It could be a week away, maybe even longer, depending on how things progressed with her aunt's condition. The uncertainty in her voice made the whole situation feel even more serious and urgent. I didn't hesitate for even a second when she told me this. Of course I told her to go. Family comes first, especially in situations like this. I immediately offered to book her flight right then and there, pulling out my laptop to start searching for the earliest available departure times. I even offered to come with her if she wanted the emotional support during such a difficult time. Having been through family medical emergencies myself, I knew how overwhelming and lonely they could feel. But Victoria declined both of my offers without much consideration. She said her cousin would handle all the travel arrangements since they knew the area better and had already started coordinating with other family members. She also said she thought it should just be her and close family there, that having me around might make things more complicated or awkward since I didn't really know any of her extended family well. She promised she'd call me as soon as she landed to let me know she'd arrived safely. Before leaving the apartment, she hugged me really tight in a way that felt different from our usual goodbyes. This wasn't some rushed, distracted hug while she was thinking about other things. It was long and slow and completely present. Her hands wrapped around my back firmly, and she pressed her cheek against my shoulder like she was trying to memorize the feeling. It was one of those proper, "I'll miss you" hugs that made me feel both loved and worried about how long she might be gone. The first few days after she left, we kept in touch exactly like we always did when one of us was traveling. We exchanged morning texts back and forth, sharing little updates about our days and inside jokes that made each other laugh. We had a couple of video calls throughout each day, usually while I was on my lunch break and again in the evening after work. She even sent me a photo of herself sitting in her childhood bedroom, with messy hair everywhere and those faded band posters hanging behind her on the wall that she'd told me about before. During our conversations, Victoria explained that the hospital situation was really tense and emotionally draining for everyone involved. Her aunt's condition was stable for the moment, but still critical enough that the family was taking turns staying overnight at the hospital to make sure someone was always there. She sounded exhausted and stressed when she talked about it, which seemed completely natural given the circumstances. I believed every single word she told me during those conversations. I wasn't doubting her at all, not even close to being suspicious about anything. I trusted her completely, and why wouldn't I? You don't get engaged to someone and then start questioning every move they make or every story they tell. That's not how commitment is supposed to work, right? The whole point of being engaged is that you hand over the keys to your heart without needing a backup plan or some kind of tracking device to monitor their every move. So when her replies started getting slower and the phone calls got shorter, I didn't question it or start worrying about hidden meanings. I figured she was simply exhausted from everything she was dealing with. The emotional stress of watching a loved one suffer, the physical exhaustion of spending long hours at the hospital, and the mental drain of coordinating with family members during a crisis. How selfish would I have to be to get annoyed at someone who was taking care of a dying aunt? I made sure to keep everything running smoothly on my end while Victoria was dealing with her family crisis. My work routine stayed exactly the same. I didn't let the situation affect my professional responsibilities or productivity. I maintained my regular gym schedule, kept our apartment clean and organized the way Victoria liked it, and made sure all her plants didn't die while she was away. Even that annoying succulent she kept on top of the fridge got proper attention, though that thing always looked like it was barely clinging to life anyway. I genuinely missed her presence around the apartment during those weeks. The place felt quieter without the sound of her singing completely off-key while folding laundry, something that used to drive me mildly crazy, but now left an obvious void. I missed her annoying habit of sticking her ice-cold feet against me in bed when the temperature dropped at night. I even found myself missing the way she'd tell me the exact same story twice in one conversation, as if I hadn't already heard every detail the first time she shared it. But despite missing these little everyday moments with her, I wasn't panicking about the situation or letting my imagination run wild. I wasn't getting suspicious or paranoid about her delayed responses or shorter phone calls. I wasn't checking her location on Find My Friends to see where she really was. I wasn't reading deep psychological meaning into her emoji choices or analyzing the tone of her messages for hidden clues. I just wanted her to come back home when she was ready, and when her family situation had stabilized. And maybe that's what still stings the most about this whole experience, the fact that I really believed every bit of her story. I had no doubts whatsoever, no second thoughts about the details she was sharing, just complete faith in everything she told me. I was like some naive idiot handing someone a lit match and assuming they wouldn't deliberately light the fuse on purpose, never considering that trust could be weaponized against me. I kept telling myself this separation was just temporary, that she'd be back home really soon and we'd pick up exactly where we left off. We'd get back to our casual wedding planning conversations, back to our regular date nights at the restaurants we'd discovered together, back to our weird little bubble of normalcy that made our relationship feel safe and predictable. I had absolutely no reason not to believe her version of events. From my perspective, everything seemed completely fine and normal. Everything felt exactly like what it should feel like when your partner is dealing with a legitimate family emergency. I missed her like crazy, sure, but I understood that family had to come first during times of crisis. Or at least, that's what I thought back then, before I learned the brutal truth about everything that was actually happening while I was sitting at home being the perfect, understanding fiancé. What I didn't know was that Victoria was about to tell her side of this story, and her version of events would completely shatter everything I believed about our relationship and the person I thought I was going to marry. Victoria's perspective. I need to start with the brutal truth that's going to make me sound like a terrible person. I didn't actually go back home to take care of anyone. There was no medical emergency at all. No ICU visits, no tragic family crisis pulling me away from Dylan, no dying aunt requiring round-the-clock care. I made the entire thing up from scratch, and every single word I told him was complete fiction. I needed a believable excuse for leaving that would be serious enough that Dylan wouldn't argue with me or ask too many probing questions. Something that would automatically trigger his sympathetic, supportive side and make him back off from wanting to be involved. And my plan worked perfectly. He didn't even blink when I told him the story. He just immediately said to take all the time I needed and offered to help however he could. That's exactly the kind of guy Dylan is, and I knew it when I crafted this lie. He's loyal to a fault, completely dependable in every situation, and way too trusting for his own good. He takes people at face value and doesn't look for hidden agendas or secret motivations. And I took full advantage of that trust, exploiting the very qualities that made him such a good partner. When I left our apartment that day, I packed 3 entire suitcases. Not some quick weekend trip duffel bag with a few changes of clothes. 3 full suitcases worth of stuff, because I wasn't planning on going anywhere for just a few days. I was prepared to be gone for over a month total, and I had already started mentally preparing for an extended absence from my life with Dylan. I drove the entire way to my hometown myself, 6.5 hours of straight driving with only one single stop for gas and drive-through coffee. I had my music blasting at full volume the whole way, windows down when the weather was nice, feeling this sense of freedom I hadn't experienced in months. I didn't make a single phone call to check in with Dylan during that drive, even though I normally would have called him at least twice during such a long trip. I wanted to completely disappear for a while on my own terms, without having to explain my mood or thoughts to anyone. And here's the confession that's probably going to make people judge me harshly. I didn't miss him at all during those first few days. You can think whatever you want about that admission, because I really don't care what anyone thinks about my feelings or motivations. The truth is, I needed a serious break from everything our relationship had become. I needed time away from our daily routine that had started feeling suffocating rather than comfortable. I was tired of all the conversations about savings accounts and wedding budgets, tired of debating which venue offered the best indoor-outdoor seating options, tired of being the perfect fiancé version of myself every single day. You know that carefully curated version of yourself that you show someone consistently until it becomes a permanent mask you can't take off? I didn't want to be that person anymore, at least not for a little while. The truth is, I'd already been texting Blake, my ex-boyfriend from way back, and this had started several weeks before I even left Dylan. It began with little innocent things at first. Just one of those, "Hey, I just saw this old photo, and it made me think of you" messages that you send without really thinking about the consequences. But those casual messages spiraled into full-blown conversations pretty quickly, the kind that stretch on for hours and make you forget about everything else happening in your life. At first, reconnecting with Blake felt like just a harmless hit of nostalgia, a little mental escape from my current reality that didn't mean anything serious. It was like looking through old photo albums or listening to songs that reminded me of a different time in my life. But deep down, I knew exactly where all of this was heading. And so did he. We both understood the trajectory of these conversations, even if neither of us was willing to say it out loud yet. During one of our longer text exchanges, Blake told me I sounded really unhappy in my messages, like something was weighing on me that I wasn't addressing directly. I told him he sounded exactly the same as he always had, which I meant in a good way. There was something comforting about talking to someone who knew me before I became this more serious, future-focused version of myself. Someone who remembered when I was more spontaneous and less concerned about building the perfect life. So when I told Dylan I needed to go be with family during this supposed medical emergency, I was already planning my re-entry into Blake's world. My trip to my hometown wasn't about reconnecting with my roots or helping family members through a crisis. It was about reopening a door I'd never really shut properly, even though I'd convinced myself it was firmly closed when I got serious with Dylan. The first night I arrived, I stayed at my mom's place like I'd told Dylan I would. I said hello to everyone, ate dinner with the family, and smiled and acted completely normal when my mom asked about Dylan and how our relationship was going. I told her everything was going perfectly fine, that we were still planning the wedding and saving money for our future together. All the standard responses that parents want to hear about their daughter's stable long-term relationship. Then right after dinner ended and I'd helped clean up the dishes, I texted Blake. We arranged to meet up the very next day for what was supposed to be just a casual walk around some of our old hangout spots, just talking and catching up on what had happened in our lives since we'd stopped being in regular contact. It was meant to be innocent reminiscing, the kind of thing you do with any old friend when you're back in your hometown. But by the time we finished our walk and ended up back at his apartment, it wasn't just innocent catching up anymore. The conversation had shifted into something more intimate and charged, filled with the kind of tension that makes the air feel electric. We ended up in his bed together before I even had time to think clearly about whether it was right or wrong, whether I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross, or what the consequences might be for my relationship with Dylan. And here's the truth that might shock you the most. I didn't feel bad about it at all. Not even a twinge of guilt or remorse in those first moments afterward. It wasn't some grand romantic love story being rekindled between soulmates who had found their way back to each other. It wasn't fireworks or destiny or whatever bullshit romantic comedies try to sell you about these kinds of situations. It was just simple and easy and familiar in a way that felt completely natural. There was no pressure to be anyone special or to live up to certain expectations. No wedding planning conversations that needed to happen, no grocery shopping lists to discuss, no shared Google Calendar invites to coordinate. Just pure physical chemistry and attraction between us, the kind that doesn't require explanations or justifications. When I was with Blake, I didn't have to think about being someone's future wife or maintaining the image of a responsible adult who had her life figured out. I could just exist in the moment without worrying about long-term consequences or how my actions fit into some bigger life plan. It was liberating in a way I hadn't experienced in months. It happened again the very next day, and the day after that one too. Not every single day of the week. I wasn't completely reckless about it, but definitely enough times to establish a pattern that felt intentional rather than accidental. I'd spend the mornings at my mom's house, pretending to help around with various household tasks or running random errands around town that made me look like a helpful daughter who was contributing during her visit. Then I'd head over to Blake's apartment for a few hours in the afternoon, usually sometime between lunch and dinner. Sometimes we'd actually talk about real, substantial things, catching up on what had happened in our lives, discussing mutual friends, sharing stories about work or family. Other times we didn't say much of anything at all, just enjoyed each other's company in a way that felt comfortable and unforced. I'd stay just long enough to feel satisfied and fulfilled, but still make it back to my mom's house before dinner time so I could continue playing the role of the caring niece who was dedicating all her time and energy to the family crisis. The timing worked out perfectly, no one suspected anything, and I never had to make excuses for being gone for extended periods. Of course, I still texted Dylan regularly throughout all of this, keeping all my messages light and believable. I'd send him a selfie here and there, usually taken in my childhood bedroom or somewhere around my mom's house that would reinforce the story I'd told him. I'd send just checking-in messages that sounded appropriately tired and stressed. I told him my aunt's condition was stable but still critical, that she still needed constant around-the-clock care from family members, and that I was exhausted all the time from spending long hours at the hospital. Dylan bought every single lie I fed him, hook, line, and sinker. He never questioned the details, never asked for specifics that might have tripped me up, never expressed any suspicion about the timing or logistics of what I was telling him. His complete trust made it almost too easy to maintain the deception. I knew this whole situation couldn't last forever, though. I mean, obviously it had to end eventually. I couldn't just disappear from my real life indefinitely. I wasn't planning to move back to my hometown permanently and restart my entire existence there. I wasn't planning to dump Dylan for Blake and completely blow up the stable life I'd built. I wasn't trying to destroy everything I'd worked toward over the past few years. I just wanted a temporary pause from all of it, a break from everything that felt heavy and suffocating about my regular life. I thought if I gave myself a full month away from all the weight and expectations of being the perfect fiancé, I'd be ready to go back and do the relationship thing properly. I'd return refreshed and recommitted, able to appreciate what Dylan and I had built together. Is that completely messed up thinking? Probably, yeah. But you know what's really funny about the whole thing? I felt more like my authentic self during those weeks with Blake than I had felt in the entire last year with Dylan. Being with Dylan was safe and secure, very future-focused and stable, which sounds absolutely great on paper and probably looks perfect from the outside, until it starts feeling like a boring office job that you show up to every day out of obligation rather than passion. Blake, on the other hand, represented pure chaos, but the kind of chaos I could step into whenever I felt like it and step out of whenever I wanted to return to my real life. I didn't need him to propose to me or prove his commitment. I didn't need him to grow up and mature into someone more responsible. I just needed him to make me feel completely alive for a little while, and he definitely did that without asking for anything complicated in return. I kept telling myself this was all temporary, that I'd eventually go back home to Dylan and things would return to normal. Dylan didn't need to know any of this had happened. What he didn't know couldn't possibly hurt him, right? And it wasn't like I was planning to marry Blake or keep this affair going forever once I returned to my real life. It was just a detour from my actual path, a brief vacation from responsibility. You ever convince yourself that something doesn't actually count if no one ever finds out about it? That's exactly what I did, over and over again. Every single time I left Blake's apartment. I'd wipe off my lipstick carefully in his bathroom mirror, redo my hair in the car before driving back to my mom's house, and walk through the front door like absolutely nothing had happened. There wasn't a single hint of guilt in my body during those moments. I had zero intention of ending my engagement to Dylan, none whatsoever. Dylan was still the safe bet for my future, the real long-term plan, the person I'd eventually walk down the aisle with and build a stable life alongside. I just didn't want to be stuck in that responsible future wife role every single day leading up to the wedding. I wanted some freedom to be reckless and spontaneous before settling into married life permanently. That's what made the whole thing feel justifiable in my mind. Twisted logic for sure, but it felt completely real and reasonable to me at the time. I didn't cheat because I had stopped loving Dylan or because I wanted to hurt him deliberately. I cheated because I wanted to feel something different, something that wasn't quiet and predictable and carefully planned out. I wanted loud and exciting. I wanted reckless and spontaneous. I wanted something that didn't come with shared Google Calendar invites and long-term savings goals attached to every conversation. So I stayed for over a month total, living this strange double life where I was pretending to be one person over the phone while living as a completely different person when the screen went dark. I'd spend my mornings and evenings playing the role of the devoted niece dealing with a family medical crisis, sending Dylan carefully crafted messages about hospital visits and sleepless nights. Then I'd spend my afternoons being the spontaneous, carefree version of myself that had been buried under years of responsible adult decision-making. The entire time I thought I had everything under perfect control. I believed that no one would ever find out the truth about what I was really doing. I was convinced that I could just walk back into my old life with Dylan like nothing had ever happened, seamlessly transitioning back into wedding planning mode and pretending that this month had been exactly what I'd told him it was. I had absolutely no idea what was coming next or how dramatically everything was about to unravel. Dylan's discovery. It was a Wednesday morning when my world completely fell apart. There was nothing particularly special about the day at all. Just another ordinary weekday that started like any other. I was half-dressed for work, standing in the kitchen scrolling through emails on my phone while waiting for my bagel to finish toasting. I was probably thinking about some mundane work project or weekend plans, completely unprepared for what was about to hit me. That's when the direct message notification came through on my phone. Some random woman I'd never seen before had sent me a message. No mutual friends or followers that I could see, no context whatsoever for why she would be contacting me. Just a completely unexpected message sitting in my inbox like a loaded gun waiting to go off. The message was brutally direct. You deserve to know the truth. Victoria's been with my ex this whole time. I stared at that message for a solid minute without moving, not clicking on anything or typing a response. I didn't even shift my position from where I was standing in the kitchen. I just stood there holding the phone, my brain trying to process what the hell I was reading and why some complete stranger would send me something like this out of nowhere. Based on the username and profile information I could see, this appeared to be Blake's ex-girlfriend, someone Victoria had mentioned in passing once or twice during casual conversations about her past. I should have just ignored the whole thing, deleted the message, and gone on with my day like it had never happened. Any rational person would have dismissed it as drama or jealousy from someone trying to stir up trouble. But I didn't do that. Instead, I opened up her profile page to see if I could gather any more context. It was a private account, of course, but the profile picture looked somewhat familiar from descriptions Victoria had given me before. Then I clicked back into the message thread to see if there was anything else there, any screenshots attached, any specific dates or details, any actual proof of the accusation she was making. There wasn't anything else there. Just that one brutal sentence with no additional context, no dramatic explanations, no evidence attached. But something about the way she had written it, flat and direct with no unnecessary drama or emotional manipulation, made it feel completely real rather than like some jealous ex trying to cause problems. I closed the app and just stood there in my kitchen, completely frozen in place. My bagel was still toasting, completely forgotten as my mind tried to process what had just happened. My hands weren't shaking or anything dramatic like that, and I wasn't pacing around the apartment in a panic. It wasn't that kind of immediate, explosive reaction. Instead, it was more like a cold drop of water sliding down the back of my neck slowly. That slow, creeping dread feeling that starts in your stomach and gradually spreads through your entire body. It's the kind of sensation you get when your gut instincts start connecting dots before your brain has time to catch up and make sense of everything. Was it actually true? Could Victoria really be cheating on me with her ex-boyfriend while I sat at home being the supportive, understanding fiancé? I didn't want to believe any of it, obviously. The accusation went against everything I thought I knew about Victoria and our relationship, but suddenly all the timing started feeling completely off and suspicious. All the vagueness in her recent stories about what was happening day to day started seeming intentional rather than just the result of being exhausted. The weird gaps in our conversations that I'd attributed to hospital visits now felt deliberate and calculated. All those too tired to FaceTime tonight excuses that had seemed perfectly reasonable suddenly felt like convenient ways to avoid having to maintain her lie in real time. The strange periods of silence on certain days that I'd explained away as family obligations now seemed like they had a completely different explanation. It suddenly felt intentional and scripted, like she'd been reading from a carefully prepared playbook rather than just naturally updating me on a genuine crisis. Every detail of her story started unraveling in my mind as I stood there thinking about the past few weeks from this new perspective. I didn't confront her about the message immediately, though. What was I supposed to say exactly? Hey, some random girl I've never met messaged me out of nowhere and now I don't trust you anymore? That conversation wouldn't go anywhere productive, and I knew it. Victoria would just spin it around on me somehow, making it look like I was being paranoid and controlling for even entertaining the idea. I've seen that manipulation tactic used before in other relationships, and I wasn't going to give her the opportunity to play that game with me. Instead, I kept completely quiet about the whole thing. I didn't reply to the message from Blake's ex, didn't call Victoria that day to fish for information, and didn't say a single word to anyone about what I'd learned. I needed to figure out if there was any truth to the accusation before I did anything that might tip her off or give her a chance to cover her tracks better. The next morning, I made a decision that felt both completely necessary and slightly crazy. I packed an overnight bag with some basic clothes and toiletries, rented a car from the place downtown, and drove straight out to Victoria's hometown. I didn't play any music during the drive, didn't make any phone calls to pass the time, and didn't even stop for food along the way. Just complete silence and endless miles of highway, with nothing but the sound of the engine running and my own thoughts stabbing at the inside of my head. It was 6.5 hours of driving with nothing but questions running through my mind on repeat. Could this really be happening to me? Was I really that blind and trusting about everything? Had I been that naive about the person I was planning to marry? The drive felt both endless and too short at the same time. Part of me wanted to turn around and go home, while another part of me needed to know the truth no matter how much it might hurt. I kept asking myself the same questions over and over during that long drive. Could this really be happening to me? Was I really that blind and trusting about everything that had been going on? Had I been that naive about the person I was planning to marry? The uncertainty was eating away at me with every mile that passed. I arrived in her hometown late in the afternoon, feeling a strange mixture of determination and dread about what I might discover. I drove straight to her mother's street, the address I'd memorized from sending Victoria care packages and birthday cards over the years. I parked 3 houses down on the opposite side of the street, positioning myself where I could see the front of the house clearly, but wouldn't be immediately obvious to anyone coming or going. Part of me was genuinely hoping that I'd sit there for hours and see absolutely nothing suspicious. I was hoping I'd feel stupid and paranoid afterward, that I'd drive back home with an apology draft already forming in my head for doubting Victoria during what was supposed to be a difficult time for her family. I wanted to be wrong about everything, to discover that the message had been some kind of mistake or malicious lie. But that's not what happened at all. It didn't take very long to see the truth with my own eyes. Victoria walked out of the house around 5:30, and I recognized her walk immediately. That confident, casual stride that I'd watched thousands of times before. She was wearing a gray hoodie and black joggers, with her hair pulled up in a messy bun on top of her head. She looked relaxed and completely unbothered, without a single sign of the stress or emotional exhaustion that should have been weighing on someone dealing with a family medical crisis. She wasn't heading toward any grocery store to pick up supplies for the family. She wasn't walking in the direction of the hospital to visit her supposedly dying aunt. She was walking towards somewhere she'd obviously been many times before, with the kind of casual familiarity that comes from routine rather than emergency visits. She got in her car and drove off without any apparent urgency or concern. I followed her, keeping a couple of cars behind to avoid being noticed. She wasn't checking her rearview mirror constantly or showing any signs of paranoia or caution in her driving. Of course, there wasn't any reason for her to be suspicious. She had no idea that I was anywhere near her hometown, and she thought her cover story was completely secure. Victoria pulled up to a small apartment complex and parked like she'd done it dozens of times before. The way she got out of the car and looked around once, not even being particularly cautious about it, just out of habit, told me everything I needed to know about how familiar this place was to her. I sat there in my rental car watching the building, waiting to see what would happen next. 3 hours passed with no movement whatsoever. No one coming or going from the apartment, no delivery drivers or other visitors, nothing at all that would suggest this was anything other than exactly what it appeared to be. Around 8:40, the door finally opened again. Victoria stepped out looking noticeably different from when she'd gone in. Her hair was down now instead of pulled up in that messy bun. Her jacket was half-zipped instead of fully closed like it had been earlier. She looked like someone who had just spent several intimate hours with someone, not like someone who had been having casual conversation with an old friend. A man walked her all the way to her car. Obviously Blake, though I'd never seen him in person before. They stood there together for a few minutes, laughing about something that seemed to genuinely amuse both of them. The interaction looked completely natural and comfortable, like they'd had this same goodbye routine countless times before. Victoria's hand casually brushed against his chest in a way that was clearly intimate and familiar, not the kind of gesture you'd make with someone you were just catching up with as an old friend. Then she kissed him properly. Not some innocent goodbye peck on the cheek that you might give to any old friend, not a quick thanks for the coffee kind of thing. It was real and deliberate and comfortable, the kind of kiss that happens between people who have been physically intimate many times before. They kissed like they'd done it 100 times already and would do it 100 times more. I lifted my phone with completely steady hands and took 3 clear photos of the scene in front of me. I didn't try to zoom in dramatically or get fancy with angles, just steady hands and 3 quick clicks of the camera button. That was all the evidence I needed to confirm what I'd already suspected, concrete, undeniable proof captured in digital pixels. After I took the photos, I just sat back in my seat and stared straight ahead at the windshield for a while. I wasn't thinking about anything specific or planning my next move. I was just letting the reality of the situation soak in completely and settle into my bones. She had been cheating on me the entire time she'd been gone. Every single text message she'd sent, every "I'm so exhausted from the hospital" excuse, every "miss you so much" lie, all of it was complete bullshit while she was living this completely different life. And what made it even worse was that she didn't even have the decency to be careful about any of it. She wasn't looking over her shoulder or being cautious about being seen. She was brazenly living out this affair like I didn't even exist, like our engagement was just some minor inconvenience she could ignore while she did whatever she wanted. I drove straight home that night without stopping anywhere to eat or process what I'd witnessed. The return trip felt completely different from the drive there. Instead of anxious uncertainty, I now had cold, hard clarity about exactly what Victoria had been doing. When I got back to our apartment, I knew exactly what needed to happen next. I started packing up all of Victoria's belongings immediately. Every single drawer she had claimed as her own, every section of the closet, every shelf in the bathroom, everything had to go. I didn't even bother folding anything neatly or treating her possessions with any particular care. I just grabbed everything that belonged to her and stuffed it into whatever containers I had available, trash bags, cardboard boxes, whatever I could find around the apartment. I pulled all her makeup and skincare products from the bathroom counter and tossed them into a grocery bag. I took down every framed photo of us together from around the apartment, including the small one from my nightstand that I'd looked at every morning for months. I slid that particular frame into the bottom of a dresser drawer where I wouldn't have to see it anymore. I worked quietly and efficiently through this process, not out of anger or dramatic emotion, but out of pure practical necessity. These belongings needed to be gone before she returned, and I needed our shared space to stop looking like the home of a couple who were planning to get married. Over the next few days, while I waited for Victoria to return, I played it completely cool in all our communications. I responded to her texts like normal, pretending I was swamped with work projects and couldn't talk much. She had absolutely no clue that anything had changed, no suspicion whatsoever that I'd discovered the truth about her month-long lie. But I knew the truth now, and that knowledge changed everything about how I saw our relationship and our future together. Every time my phone buzzed with a message from Victoria, all I could see were those 3 photos stored in my camera roll. Her walking into Blake's apartment like I didn't exist. Her kissing him like we hadn't built a life together. Her casually brushing her hair back like she'd just lived out some romantic movie scene instead of completely destroying everything we had built over 4 years. I was completely ready for her to come back home and walk right into what was waiting for her. I had mentally prepared myself for this confrontation, and I knew exactly how it needed to go down. Victoria's return. The second I stepped inside our apartment, I knew something was seriously wrong. The air felt completely different, like the room had been scrubbed clean of my presence and everything that made it feel like our shared home. I looked around carefully, taking in details that seemed off but that I couldn't quite put my finger at first. I noticed immediately that my shoes weren't sitting by the front door where I always left them. The scarf I usually hung on the coat hook near the entrance was nowhere to be found. There was no coffee mug left on the kitchen counter from Dylan's morning routine, something that was always there because he never cleaned up right away after breakfast. And then I saw all the bags, trash bags and cardboard boxes stacked up against the wall near the hallway, clearly packed with belongings. My stomach completely dropped as I realized what I was looking at. Those were my things. all my possessions that had been carefully collected and packed away like I was being evicted. I called out for Dylan, my voice echoing strangely in the apartment that suddenly felt enormous and empty. Nothing came back except dead silence throughout the entire place. No response, no movement, no indication that anyone else was even there. The silence felt ominous and final in a way that made my chest tighten with panic. I walked further inside, moving slowly through rooms that had been completely transformed in my absence. I saw that all the framed photos of us together were gone from their usual spots. The little one of us from that weekend cabin trip that normally sat on Dylan's nightstand had completely disappeared. The Polaroid from my birthday celebration that we'd kept on the kitchen windowsill was nowhere to be found. Even the stupid refrigerator magnets we'd collected from various trips and dates had been removed from the refrigerator door. I froze in place in the middle of our living room, trying to breathe normally and process what I was seeing. I tried to tell myself that maybe Dylan was just cleaning and reorganizing everything while I was away. Maybe he decided to redecorate or rearrange furniture, and this was just part of that process. Maybe I was overthinking the whole situation and jumping to dramatic conclusions about something that had a perfectly innocent explanation. But I wasn't overthinking anything, and I knew it. I knew exactly what this was, even though I desperately didn't want to face the reality of what it meant. This wasn't spring cleaning or redecorating. This was the systematic removal of my existence from our shared life. Dylan walked out from the bedroom like he'd been waiting there for me to arrive, probably listening for the sound of my key in the lock. There was no visible anger on his face, no shouting or dramatic confrontation brewing. He looked completely calm, but it was that scary kind of calm that chills you to the bone, the kind that tells you someone has already made final decisions and won't be changing their mind. He didn't ask me any questions about where I'd been or how my supposed family crisis had gone. He didn't even say my name or acknowledge that I'd been gone for over a month. He just walked over to where I was standing in the middle of our living room, completely silent and purposeful in his movements. Without saying a word, he opened his phone and tapped the screen a few times with deliberate precision. Then he turned the phone toward me so I could see exactly what he wanted to show me. 3 photos were displayed clearly on the screen, and my brain took a few seconds to process what I was looking at before the full horror of the situation hit me. There I was, captured in perfect digital clarity. Me at Blake's apartment building, walking confidently through the front door like I belonged there. Me walking out hours later, looking obviously different than when I'd gone in. Me kissing Blake goodbye in the parking lot, my hand on his chest in a gesture that was unmistakably intimate and familiar. My brain completely short-circuited when I saw those photos. It was like experiencing a full system shutdown where all my thoughts and responses just stopped functioning entirely. All I could do was stare at Dylan's phone screen, unable to look up at his face or process what this meant for our relationship. Everything I had been telling him for the past month, every lie I had carefully constructed, every excuse I had given, it was all completely exposed and undeniable. I opened my mouth to say something, anything that might help explain the situation or minimize the damage, but no words came out at all. My throat felt completely closed, and my mind was blank of any explanation that could possibly make this better or more understandable. Then the first thing that finally came out of my mouth wasn't, "I'm sorry for everything I've done," or "Please let me explain what happened." It wasn't guilt or remorse or any acknowledgement of how badly I had betrayed his trust. Instead, it was pure defensive panic taking over. "You followed me," I said to him. Those were the exact words that came out, because I didn't know what else to do when someone holds up undeniable proof that you've been lying for an entire month. Not, "I can explain everything," or "Please let me talk." Just those 3 accusatory words that tried to shift the blame onto him somehow. What the hell are you supposed to say when someone confronts you with photographic evidence of your affair? When they've caught you red-handed in the most devastating lie you've ever told? I had no script prepared for this moment because I had never believed it would actually happen. Dylan didn't flinch at my accusation or show any reaction to my attempt to make him the bad guy in this situation. He didn't say a single word back to me, didn't defend his actions, or explain how he'd discovered the truth. He just stood there looking at me like I was a complete stranger he'd never met before, and in that moment, maybe I really was exactly that. I tried again with a completely different approach, switching tactics desperately. I told him it didn't mean anything at all, that it was just a stupid mistake I'd made. I said I just needed some space to figure things out, that things had gotten out of hand in a way I never intended. I told him I didn't plan any of what had happened with Blake, that it was just a moment of confusion that spiraled beyond my control. All lies. And I could tell that Dylan knew they were lies even as the words were coming out of my mouth. He didn't budge an inch from his position or show any sign that my explanations were having any impact on him whatsoever. So I shifted tactics completely, abandoning any pretense of remorse and switching to anger instead. I snapped at him that he had absolutely no right to follow me around like some kind of stalker. I accused him of invading my privacy completely, of violating my trust by tracking my movements without my knowledge or consent. I told him that what he had done, following me to my hometown and spying on me, was way worse than anything I had done during my time away. That accusation got a tiny reaction from him for the first time since I'd walked through the door. I saw one small twitch in his jaw muscle, a barely perceptible sign that my words had hit some kind of nerve. But still no actual words came out of his mouth, no defense of his actions or justification for what he'd done. Seeing that small reaction encouraged me to keep going, so I started pacing around the room while ranting about whatever came to mind. I said we'd been stuck in a rut for months, that our relationship had become boring and predictable. I told him he never noticed how unhappy I was feeling, that he was too routine and emotionally shut off to see that I was struggling. I accused him of being too boring and predictable, of never doing anything spontaneous or exciting that made me feel alive. I said I just wanted to feel something real again, something that wasn't constantly focused on wedding planning and financial responsibility. I told him he'd become so obsessed with building the perfect future that he'd forgotten how to live in the present moment with any kind of passion or excitement. Dylan just stood there through all of my ranting and accusations, letting me exhaust myself with complaints and blame shifting. He didn't interrupt me or try to defend himself against any of the things I was saying. He just waited patiently for me to finish, like he was letting me get everything out of my system before responding. Then he said something that stopped me completely cold in the middle of my pacing and ranting. Just two simple words that cut through all my desperate explanations and excuses like a knife. "We're done." He said it flat and final, with no emotion in his voice whatsoever. No anger, no sadness, no room for negotiation or discussion. Just a simple statement of fact that our relationship was over, delivered like he was reading a weather report. He picked up a small box from the kitchen counter that I hadn't noticed before, opened it up, and showed me what was inside. The engagement ring, my engagement ring, sitting there in its original velvet-lined box like it had never been worn at all. "You don't wear this anymore," he said simply, and then put the box in his pocket before I could reach for it or try to grab it back. I tried desperately to reach for the ring, extending my hand toward him like I could somehow convince him to give it back to me. But he had already secured it in his pocket, and it was clear that he had no intention of letting me have it back. That ring represented everything we'd built together, all our plans for the future, and now it was gone just like everything else. Dylan told me that all my belongings would be out on the front porch within the next hour, and that I should call someone if I didn't have a ride arranged to pick them up. He said it matter-of-factly, like he was giving directions to a delivery person, rather than ending a 4-year relationship and an engagement. It hit me like a brick wall then that this wasn't just a fight we were having that would eventually blow over. This wasn't a temporary argument where we'd both cool down and then work things out through long conversations and compromise. This was the complete and final end of everything we'd built together over the past 4 years. I tried desperately to force myself to cry, actually squeezing my eyes shut and trying to make tears come out so that Dylan might see how devastated I was and reconsider his decision. But nothing happened at all. No tears, no dramatic emotional breakdown that might have softened his resolve or made him realize he was making a huge mistake. I wasn't ready for this level of finality. I thought I still had time somehow to explain my side of things and make him understand my perspective. I thought I could smooth everything over with the right combination of apologies and explanations. I thought he'd yell at me and we'd have a huge fight, and then eventually we'd both calm down and maybe find a way to work through this betrayal together. But Dylan was completely done with me, and there was no negotiation possible. No amount of begging or explaining was going to change his mind about what needed to happen next. He had already made his decision and moved past any possibility of reconciliation. I left with my packed bags that same day, not even attempting to argue anymore or convince him to give me another chance. I just grabbed what I could carry easily and walked out of our apartment like I was a complete stranger who had never lived there. The whole process felt surreal and final, like I was erasing myself from a life that had never really belonged to me in the first place. Since that day, I've tried absolutely everything I can think of to reach him and somehow repair the damage I've caused. I've called his phone countless times at all hours of the day and night, but he never answers. I've sent him text messages repeatedly, ranging from long apologies to short pleas for just one conversation. Complete radio silence on every attempt. I sent him a long, detailed email where I tried to explain everything that had happened and why I'd made the choices I did. I poured my heart out in that message, describing my feelings and motivations in a way I'd never been able to articulate before. Still nothing back from him, not even a brief acknowledgement that he'd received it. I messaged his sister, trying to use her as an intermediary to reach him and maybe get some insight into how he was processing everything. She left me on read immediately without responding at all, making it clear that his family was completely on his side and wanted nothing to do with me. I sent a direct message to one of his close friends, just one person, asking if Dylan was doing okay and if there was any chance he might be willing to talk to me eventually. The friend replied exactly once with a message that was brief and brutal. "He's fine. Don't contact him again." That was it. No additional context, no suggestions for how I might make things right, just a clear directive to leave Dylan alone. I tried telling my version of events to a few of our mutual friends, spinning the whole story in a way that made me look more sympathetic. I said I was confused and overwhelmed by the pressure of getting married, that I'd made a terrible mistake but hadn't meant to hurt anyone. Some people nodded sympathetically and seemed to understand my perspective. Others completely ghosted me afterward, clearly choosing Dylan's side in the aftermath of our breakup. One person was brutally honest with me about what they thought of my actions. They looked me straight in the eye and said, "You ruined the best thing that ever happened to you." I don't know if that assessment is actually true, but it definitely feels like it might be when I'm lying awake at night thinking about everything I've lost. I still check Dylan's social media sometimes, scrolling through his profiles looking for any updates or signs of how he's doing without me. I'm always hoping to see something that might give me insight into his emotional state, or whether he ever thinks about what we used to have together. But there's never anything new posted. No photos, no status updates, no indication of what's happening in his life now. It's just complete radio silence across all his accounts, like I never existed in his life at all. Like our 4 years together, our engagement, our plans for the future, none of it ever happened. He's completely erased any trace of our relationship from his online presence, and he's not sharing anything new that might give me a window into his current state of mind. I'm back at my mom's house now, sleeping in my old childhood bedroom like some teenager who screwed up badly and had to move back home in shame. The room still has the same furniture and decorations from when I was in high school, and being surrounded by those reminders of my younger self makes the whole situation feel even more pathetic and regressive. Every single day is a complete mess for me now. I can't eat properly anymore. Food either tastes like nothing or makes me feel sick to my stomach. I don't have any work lined up because I'd been so focused on the drama with Blake that I let my freelance design projects fall by the wayside. My professional reputation has probably suffered from my unreliability during that month when I was supposed to be handling family emergencies. Blake hasn't texted me even once since I left my hometown and returned to face the consequences of my actions. Of course he hasn't reached out. That whole thing was never going to turn into anything serious or long-term. He got what he wanted from me during those weeks, and now he's moved on with his life like nothing ever happened. I was just a temporary distraction for him, not someone he was planning to build a future with. Sometimes I still think I can fix this somehow, that maybe if I show up at Dylan's workplace or apartment in person, I'll be able to make him listen to me. Maybe if I cry the right way or say exactly the right combination of words, he'll see that I was just lost and confused rather than deliberately malicious. Maybe I can convince him that what we had was real enough to be worth fighting for, despite my terrible choices. But I know Dylan won't give me that chance, and I understand that now with complete certainty. He's not the type of person who plays breakup makeup games or makes empty threats to get attention. When Dylan says he's done with someone, he means it completely and permanently. There's no negotiation, no second chances, no dramatic reconciliation scenes. And the worst part of everything that's happened is that he didn't scream at me or break things in anger when he confronted me with the truth. He didn't call me horrible names or try to hurt me emotionally the way I had hurt him. He just ended our relationship cleanly and decisively, like turning off a light switch. No drama, no extended arguments, no attempts to make me suffer. Just a calm, final decision that our time together was over. I used to think that being loved by someone like Dylan meant I was safe forever, that having his complete trust and devotion was like having a security blanket that would protect me no matter what mistakes I made. I thought his loyalty meant I could take risks without real consequences, that his understanding nature would always give me room to figure things out and come back home. But it turns out that being loved by someone like Dylan just meant that when the line finally got crossed, there was absolutely no coming back from it. His trust was complete, but it was also fragile in a way I never understood until it was too late. And now all I have left from what was supposed to be the rest of my life is a stack of garbage bags filled with belongings that feel like they belong to someone else. I have a phone screen that stays dark and silent no matter how many times I check it for messages that will never come. I have memories of an engagement ring that I'll never wear again, sitting in Dylan's pocket like a symbol of everything I threw away for a few weeks of excitement that meant absolutely nothing in the end. This whole experience has taught me something brutal about the nature of trust in relationships. When you're with someone who loves you completely and trusts you without reservation, it's easy to convince yourself that their love is unconditional and permanent. You start to believe that their commitment to you is so strong that it can survive anything you might do to test it. But what I learned too late is that people like Dylan don't give their trust carelessly, and they don't take its betrayal lightly. When someone who has never doubted you suddenly has undeniable proof that you've been lying to them for weeks, when someone who has always supported you discovers that you've been living a completely different life behind their back, there's no amount of explanation or apology that can repair that damage. I destroyed something that had taken 4 years to build in just 1 month of selfish choices. I traded a stable, loving relationship with someone who would have done anything for me for a few weeks of physical excitement with someone who didn't care about me at all. I gave up a future with someone who knew me better than anyone else for temporary thrills with someone who was just using me to pass the time. The hardest part isn't even the loss of Dylan specifically, although that pain is enormous and constant. The hardest part is knowing that I did this to myself entirely. No one forced me to create that elaborate lie about my aunt being sick. No one made me pack 3 suitcases and drive to my hometown to cheat on my fiancé. No one twisted my arm and made me betray the trust of the best person I've ever known. I made every single one of those choices deliberately, and now I have to live with the consequences for the rest of my life. I have to wake up every morning knowing that I had something precious and real, and I destroyed it for reasons that don't even make sense to me anymore. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had just been honest with Dylan about feeling restless and needing some space to figure things out. Maybe we could have worked through those feelings together. Maybe we could have found ways to bring more excitement and spontaneity into our relationship without me having to blow everything up. Maybe he would have understood my need for independence without me having to lie and cheat to get it. But I'll never know the answer to those questions because I chose deception over communication, betrayal over honesty, and temporary excitement over lasting love. Now I'm sitting in my childhood bedroom at 29 years old, surrounded by garbage bags and regret, learning what it feels like when someone you've taken for granted finally stops taking you back. That's my story. That's how I destroyed the best relationship I've ever had for absolutely nothing. If there's any lesson in this mess, it's probably that some mistakes are too big to come back from, and some people are too good to treat the way I treated Dylan. I just wish I had figured that out before it was too late to matter.